Hello, my name is Craig Garthwaite. I'm a strategy professor at the Kellogg School of Management and the director of the program on healthcare at the school. Normally this time of year, I'd be up at our global hub, our beautiful building in Evanston, teaching classes and inviting prospective students in to get a feel of what the academic experience is like at Kellogg. Obviously, with the global coronavirus pandemic, that's not something we can do right now as we're teaching all classes virtually. But we still wanted to give you a sense of what it was like to be in the Kellogg classroom. And so today I'm going to talk to you a bit about how we think about applying the tools of economics and strategy, some lessons we can learn about pharmaceutical innovation from the post-coronavirus world. But this won't be exactly like a Kellogg class, because one of the best things about teaching at Kellogg is my ability to engage with the students and the students' ability to engage with each other. Obviously, that's not something we can do in this static video. This will give you a sense of the way that we use the tools of our academic disciplines to think about questions of business, in this case, the business of healthcare. And in the fall, you can join us for the actual in-class experience as students are incoming cohort. If you think back about 6 months ago, prior to the emergence of the coronavirus pandemic, the most frequently discussed healthcare topic that I dealt with was pharmaceutical pricing. And that dominated most of what we thought about at that time. And what had happened is the idea that something needed to happen about prescription drug pricing had become this rare point of bipartisan consensus in a fairly contentious Washington, D.C. environment. In fact, we had President Trump talking about tying U.S. drug prices to Europe. And then we had Speaker Pelosi offering a plan to negotiate U.S. prices, which was really doing the same thing, tying our U.S. prices to Europe. So we had President Trump and Speaker Pelosi agreeing on a policy point. And this political consensus was driven by a great deal of anger towards the pharmaceutical industry. It's perhaps not surprising. Prescription drugs are sold at many multiples of the marginal cost of production. Patients are exposed to meaningful cost sharing for these products, certainly more than other medical services, which tend to have more full insurance. And that makes it hard to access those drugs, and the high prices for drugs are also making it expensive to buy health insurance. As a result of all this, pharmaceutical firms maintain a particularly negative sentiment in the market. You can see that anecdotally in cartoons. It's not hard to find cartoons similar to this, right? Your money or your life was sort of the mean big pharma guy holding a pill bottle over somebody. You can also see it more systematically in polling. This is polling data from Gallup on the net sentiment towards various industries. And there at the bottom is the pharmaceutical industry, all the way at the bottom with a negative 31 net positive ranking. To give you some sense about how bad that actually is, that's below airlines, that's below the legal field and lawyers, and that's below the federal government. Right? That's sort of where the pharmaceutical industry is. And the thing is that you start to get a question, okay, well, why do we let this happen? Why do we allow these high prices? And if you start to think about the economics underlying the industry, you'll see that the pharmaceutical sector starts with an inherent market failure. And that the high prices we see are actually a result of our policy decisions to try and address this underlying market failure. Right? And that failure exists in pharma heavily, but also in any IP-intensive industry. And it stems from the fact that the scientific knowledge that's created by investment in research and development is effectively a public good. Once it's created, it's very hard to stop other people from building on that knowledge or actually taking that knowledge for themselves. And because of that, absent some type of government intervention, you'll end up with a holdup problem. What we mean when saying a holdup problem in economics is that firms are unwilling to make investments that we know will create economic value, because they are unsure that they'll capture a sufficient share of that value in return for their large fixed and sunk investments. And so we give you all types of patents and market exclusivity, and that leads to high prices, and optimal policy then becomes balancing those prices and innovation. We're talking about a fundamental trade-off where we're balancing access to products today with the need to create incentives to create products in the future. And to the extent that the new products we get as a result of these policies generate more value than the decreased access we have today, we can increase society's welfare overall with this process. But understanding that policy trade-off and the business decisions that will underlie that trade-off requires knowing a few things. How much welfare do we lose because of high prices today? What types of new products are we going to get in the future? And how much welfare do those products generate? And to help think about that, we have to think a bit about how products create value overall. So we can pull in a tool that we develop in your core strategy class at Kellogg which is the value creation and capture framework. And this links the profits that firms will make to the strategic decisions that they undertake. All right, so what do we have here? We have the average cost of production, we have the quantity sold, and so that green box becomes the total cost of production. And then we have the important concept here of the benefit to the customer or the willingness to pay. Where willingness to pay for an economist is the absolute most you would be willing and able to pay for a product. And the difference between the most you're willing to pay for a product and the cost of production is the economic value that is created. Now, the nice thing about a market economy is that we're not forced to always pay the most we'd be willing to pay for a product. So we're going to split that economic value up with a price, right? And we're going to have prices minus cost times quantity be the profit that firms get, and willingness to pay minus prices times quantity, consumer surplus, which is the happy feeling that consumers get when they don't have to pay the absolute most they would have paid for a good or service. And so to understand this value, the sort of size of the value that we get here, we really have to figure out is what drives customer willingness to pay for the product. Or another way of saying that is, what is the value of a new drug? Regardless of how you want to think about paying for this, single payer, taking patents, a market economy, at some point payers and manufacturers have to figure out what is the value of a new pharmaceutical product. And determining that accurately means you have to think about the variety of ways that a drug can create value. Now, perhaps the most traditional and most obvious way is the direct and indirect clinical value of the product. This is the traditional way of thinking about a drug's value. This is the domain of what we refer to as health technology assessment, where they're trying to develop a metric for the clinical value of a product. And it's going to be based on the quality adjusted life years of a product. The term you might have heard about, which is a quality. It's really the percentage of the year that you get to enjoy. And we're thinking about there as something that captures both the quantity and the quality of the life that you get, how long you live, but also how much you enjoy that time. You can augment these clinical assessments to think about things like what are other medical treatments you won't have to get because you're now healthier because the drug exists. You can also think about things like treating orphan diseases or things like that. But all of them are meant to give you an estimate of the clinical impact of the drug. What we're going to see, and what I think that the coronavirus pandemic makes really clear, is that there are a lot of other ways that drugs can create value or new innovations can create value that are beyond the clinical value of the product. And once you start to account for that, you see that actually the true value of new innovations might be much higher than you would think by a simple clinical measure. So what are some of these ways? One is insurance value. That might sound strange, right, that a medical innovation is creating insurance, right? So how can an innovation provide insurance? Let's think about something like Parkinson's disease, which is a neurological disorder. This is an example that's built out in a nice paper by Darius Lakdawala and co-authors. It's an example of how we bring the academic world into the Kellogg classroom to help us think about fundamental questions of business. But when we think about Parkinson's disease in terms of quality, these quality-adjusted life years, we can do the following calculation. Let's just assume, right, to put some numbers to this, that getting Parkinson's disease reduces the percentage of value that one would get from a year of life from 80% to 40%. Now, if we value each life year, let's say $50,000, then Parkinson's would create a health cost to someone who gets it of $20,000, right? 80% minus 40% times 50,000. Now let's consider a firm develops a treatment for Parkinson's. They're going to sell for $5,000, and it means you only suffer a reduction of value if you got Parkinson's from 80% to 70%. Well, that treatment is going to increase qualities for someone who has Parkinson's by $15,000. It's going to reduce the health shock of getting Parkinson's. And so a traditional view of the clinical value of this product would say the net clinical value is $10,000 because it gives you $15,000 in health benefit, but we're going to charge you $5,000 for it. However, that misses the fact that this product decreases the variance in outcomes for individuals. Now it's not as bad to get Parkinson's as it previously was because we've made it better, we've decreased the health shock. And that's a value that's enjoyed by everyone because everyone was facing this risk of the health shock from Parkinson's. Remember that insurance fundamentally is a financial product meant to decrease the risk of negative shocks and health insurance of negative health shocks. And so in that way, the mere existence of this treatment generates value for the entire pool. Once a treatment exists, the negative health shock for Parkinson's decreases from 20,000 to 5,000. And given that we as humans are largely risk-averse people, that reduction in risk has benefit. What's happened is that the treatment, the innovation, has effectively turned an uninsurable health risk into an insurable financial risk. Now, we still have to spend the $5,000. We can buy health insurance to shield us from that $5,000 risk. There was no insurance you had against the negative health shock from Parkinson's previously. And you want a more salient example, think about the insurance value from COVID-19. How would we all feel if we knew that there was an effective antiviral treatment that existed, maybe something like Gilead's product, which is currently in clinical trials, that would decrease the downside risk of getting the coronavirus? What would that do for any individual's utility or the happiness they would get knowing that that existed? That value will exist for everyone, even if only a relatively small fraction of the population actually ends up infected. Another related thing that the coronavirus makes clear for us is that drugs, particularly for infectious conditions, have a contagion value as well, right? Imagine again an effective treatment or even a vaccine for coronavirus that would allow all of us to go back to work. We've had about 10 million people, 3 million people 2 weeks ago, 6 million people last week declare new jobless claims in the US. We passed a $2 trillion stimulus. We all agree that there needs to be a phase 4 that includes maybe infrastructure spending or other things to try and increase the health of our economy because of the coronavirus. Imagine if all that went away if we had a vaccine, how much value that product would create that would far exceed the direct clinical value of the product. In addition, you can start to think about the scientific option value of the product, where the first treatment we get might not be that good, but that helps us understand the process of the virus underlying COVID-19 to allow us to make better treatments in the future. And again, that's a value for everyone that might not accrue just to the person taking the drug. And so once we realize that all of this value exists, we now have to get to the point of who should pay for it. Now, if pharmaceuticals were really just purchased solely cash out of pocket by the person who consumed them, it would seem strange to include these other forms of value in the price. After all, the person paying for the product then would only get a fraction of the contagion value. It might not get very much of the option value at all. But the world we live in is not one where most individuals pay for the products out of pocket. Instead, it's one where the insurance pool pays the majority of the price of it. And therefore, the willingness to pay that underlies the price in the market should reflect not the value to the individual patient, but to everyone in that insurance pool. Now, why does this all matter? Why are we thinking about this? Well, in the end, we only get the products we're willing to pay for. Prices are a signal to the market. They're a signal to investors or a signal to manufacturers about how they should allocate their resources to develop things to sell in the market. And so if we deliberately underprice things because we don't account for the value, we're not going to get the treatments we want. But there are certainly some coordination problems we have to think about. How should we pay for this? Should society pay for it as a whole? Should each individual insurance pool pay for it? But beyond those coordination problems which we can solve is the underlying fact that we need to appropriately account for the value of these products. We want to think about the prices of that. We also want to think about it today. We must acknowledge the fact that the pace of innovation is fundamentally slow here in the biopharmaceutical market. There are certain rate-limiting steps, be it clinical trials or understanding the science, that can't be bypassed just by throwing money at it. And our attempts to create antiviral treatments right now with the SARS-CoV-2 virus that underlies COVID-19 gives us a very clear example of those rate-limiting steps. But it also should make clear to us that this is not the last pandemic that we will face. One of my favorite movies is the movie Robert Redford movie Spy Game. He's talking to his assistant about some plans that he's making for the future. And she's asking why he's doing that now. And he says, when did Noah build the ark, Gladys? He built it before the rain. You build these things before the rain. You make these innovation investments before you need them. Because once the pandemic is here, it's not clear you have time to make these investments. And that's the final sort of example we'll talk about, which is the world of antibiotics. We know that there are a lot of diseases which are becoming resistant to our current arsenal of antibiotics. And every day, that resistance gets stronger. But we also know that we've had several companies that have made new broad spectrum antibiotics that could be very useful for these conditions. But those companies have gone bankrupt, even though they have made products that work. But they've gone bankrupt because antibiotics, and when it comes to disease resistance, are a product we want you not to take today. We want them to be invented so we have them 10 years from now when we really need them. But we got to figure out a way to pay for that, because it's actually very hard to think about getting compensated for making a product that we don't want you to take. And so we need ways and systems that think about paying for products and drugs that reflect the value that they create. Because in the end, we will get everything that we are willing to pay for and nothing that we are unwilling. So this gives you a sense about how we take concepts of economics, both from the academic literature and from theory models, and apply them to the current problems that are facing the business of healthcare. This is what underlies the Kellogg classroom, our approach to academics overall and to sort of the business of healthcare specifically. Thank you for joining me today here in my sort of humble office. In the future, I hope to see you up at the Global Hub in the fall up at Kellogg, which is a much nicer setting to have this, and in particular allows us to engage with each other and have a much more robust conversation about these pressing issues in the business of healthcare. Thank you very much. Stay safe and keep social distancing.